History remembers kings but forgets queens. It's a truth so ingrained in our understanding of the past that we rarely stop to question it. We know the names of great conquerors, philosophers, and emperors, men whose stories have been told and retold for centuries. But what about the women who ruled, innovated, and shaped civilizations alongside them? Their stories were often erased, minimized, or attributed to the men around them. Today, we're setting the record straight. Imagine a world where the brilliance of female leaders wasn't just a footnote, but a cornerstone of history. What if these women had been given the recognition they deserved? The truth is, they were just as strategic, just as visionary, and just as powerful as their male counterparts, sometimes even more so. Yet their legacies were buried under layers of bias and time. This video is a journey into the shadows of antiquity, where 20 extraordinary women have been waiting for their moment in the light. These weren't just rulers, they were diplomats, military strategists, cultural pioneers, and symbols of resilience in eras when power was almost exclusively a man's domain. Some led armies to victory, others brokered peace between warring nations, a few revolutionized art, science, or governance in ways that still echo today. But their achievements were downplayed, their names faded from records, or their stories rewritten to fit the narratives of others. Why does this matter now? Because history isn't just about the past, it's about who we are and what we value. When we overlook these women, we're left with a fractured understanding of human potential. We miss the full picture of how societies evolved, how power was wielded, and how change was made. So let's step off the beaten path and into the untold chapters of history. Together, we'll meet queens who defied empires, scholars who challenged the intellectual norms of their time, and leaders whose wisdom could have altered the course of civilizations if only they'd been heard. This isn't just about correcting the record. It's about rediscovering role models whose courage and ingenuity resonate across millennia. These women didn't just exist, they thrived against all odds in worlds that tried to silence them. And their stories are nothing short of revolutionary. Ready to meet them? Let's begin. Picture this, a one-eyed queen, spear in hand, riding at the head of her army as they march toward the might of Rome. This wasn't a legend. This was Amanirenas, the warrior queen of Nubia, who stared down an empire and refused to blink. While Rome under Augustus Caesar expanded its reach across the Mediterranean, Amanirenas stood as the unbreakable shield of her kingdom, Kush. She didn't just resist Roman conquest, she launched a daring counterattack, leading her forces deep into enemy territory, sacking Roman forts, and even toppling statues of Augustus himself. Her boldness sent shockwaves through the empire. What made Amanirenas extraordinary wasn't just her courage on the battlefield, but her strategic genius off it. When Rome retaliated with overwhelming force, she didn't retreat, she outmaneuvered them. After years of grueling warfare, she negotiated a peace treaty so favorable that Rome, for perhaps the first time, agreed to terms that didn't humiliate their opponent. Kush kept its independence, its borders intact, and even secured exemptions from tribute payments. Roman historians like Strabo, who rarely praised foreign leaders, admitted her tenacity and skill. But Amanirenas' legacy wasn't just about war. She was a cultural force, ensuring Kushite traditions thrived even under the shadow of Rome's dominance. Her reign proved that a woman could command armies, outthink emperors, and protect her people's sovereignty against impossible odds. While history often reduces women to supporting roles, Amanirenas rewrote the script, leading not from the sidelines but from the front lines. And she wasn't alone. Across the ancient world, other women rose to meet the challenges of their time with the same unshakable resolve, like another ruler who faced down an empire, not with swords, but with wisdom and diplomacy. In the heart of Alexandria, where the Mediterranean sun lit the halls of learning, one woman's mind burned brighter than all others. Hypatia wasn't just a scholar. She was a beacon of enlightenment in an age when wisdom was too often seen as the domain of men. Born in the 4th century, she mastered mathematics, astronomy, and philosophy with a clarity that left even the most learned men of her era in awe. Her lectures drew crowds not because she was a novelty, but because her insights were unparalleled. Students traveled across continents to study under her, including Synesius of Cyrene, who would later write of her with reverence, calling her the genuine guide to philosophy's sacred mysteries. What set Hypatia apart wasn't just her brilliance, but her refusal to be confined by the expectations of her time. In a city where the great library of Alexandria had once stood as a symbol of human knowledge only to be lost to history's flames, she became a living library herself. She didn't just preserve ancient wisdom, she expanded it, writing treatises on geometry and astronomy that pushed the boundaries of thought. Her work on conic sections laid groundwork future mathematicians would build upon for centuries. Yet, her legacy is often overshadowed by the dramatic myths surrounding her death. While popular stories paint her as a martyr to religious fanaticism, the truth is far more nuanced. Hypatia's true power lay not in how she died, but in how she lived, teaching, questioning, and proving that intellect had no gender. The tragedy of Hypatia's story isn't just the violence that ended her life, but the loss of what might have been. As political turmoil engulfed Alexandria, her voice, one of reason, curiosity, and unwavering dedication to truth, was silenced, but her influence didn't vanish. Her students carried her teachings across the empire, seeding ideas that would outlast the rise and fall of kingdoms. In a world where the library's destruction symbolized the fragility of knowledge, Hypatia stood as proof that ideas couldn't be so easily erased. Yet, for every Hypatia who challenged the mind, there were women who mastered the art of influence in quieter, but no less powerful, ways. While some led with swords or scrolls, others wielded something just as formidable, the subtle, unshakable force of diplomacy. The desert wind carried the scent of spices and ambition as Zenobia of Palmyra rode into history, her robes rippling like the banners of an empire she dared to claim. This wasn't just a queen, this was a woman who looked at Rome's sprawling dominion and decided it could be hers. By the 3rd century, Palmyra was a glittering crossroads of trade and culture, a city where Persian silks met Roman marble, and Zenobia ruled it all with the precision of a general and the flair of a philosopher queen. She didn't just wear power, she redefined it. Fluent in multiple languages, a patron of scholars, and a military strategist who led her troops into battle, Zenobia was a paradox the Roman Empire never saw coming. Her audacity was unmatched. When Rome faltered under internal strife, she seized Egypt, marched into Anatolia, and declared Palmyra an equal to the empire itself. But this wasn't mere conquest, it was vision. Zenobia's court became a sanctuary for thinkers and artists, blending Greek, Persian, and Arab traditions into a cultural renaissance. She reformed taxes to ease burdens on the poor, rebuilt cities, and championed religious tolerance in an age of division. To her people, she was more than a ruler, she was a unifying force in a fractured world. Yet Rome would not be humbled forever. Emperor Aurelian, the restorer of the world, marched east to crush her rebellion. Even in defeat, Zenobia's legend grew. Captured and paraded through Rome in golden chains, a spectacle meant to break her, she refused to fade into obscurity. Some say she died in exile, others that she married a Roman senator and lived out her days in quiet defiance. But the real mystery isn't her fate, it's how history remembers her. Was she a rebel, a traitor to Rome's order, or a visionary who saw empires as things to be remade, not merely obeyed? Zenobia's story forces us to confront the biases that label ambition in men as greatness and in women as treachery. While Rome wrote her as a footnote to Aurelian's triumph, her legacy outlasted their empire. She proved that power could be wielded with intellect and grace, that a ruler could be both warrior and scholar. And as her city of Palmyra crumbled to ruins, it left behind a question: what might the world have looked like if her vision had prevailed? From the sands of the desert, we turn to the sea, where another queen would prove that the waves, too, could bow to a woman's will. The Aegean Sea churned beneath the hulls of Artemisia's warships as she carved a path through history, one that defied every expectation of her era. Here was a queen who didn't just observe the Greco-Persian wars from the safety of shore. She commanded her own fleet, standing shoulder to shoulder with King Xerxes as one of his most trusted advisors. In a world where women were often relegated to the shadows of power, Artemisia of Caria emerged as a master tactician, her name whispered with equal parts admiration and unease from Athens to Susa. What made her extraordinary wasn't just her presence in a male-dominated war council, but the sheer audacity of her strategies. When Xerxes hesitated at the Battle of Salamis, it was Artemisia who urged bold action, warning against underestimating the cunning of the Greek navy. Her advice proved prophetic, though Persia's defeat was catastrophic. Her own ships slipped through the chaos with barely a scratch, a testament to her unrivaled seamanship. Herodotus, the father of history, couldn't resist painting her as an enigma. To him, she was both villain and virtuoso, a Persian ally who fought with manly courage, yet whose loyalty seemed to shift with the tides. He recounts how, when pursued by an Athenian vessel, she deliberately rammed a friendly ship to save her own crew, leaving her enemies so bewildered they assumed she'd switched sides. Was this treachery or tactical genius? Even Herodotus seems torn, calling her the only one with the nerve to speak the truth to Xerxes, even as he frames her actions as ruthless. But beneath the legend lies a lesser-known truth. Artemisia may have ruled Halicarnassus in her own right, governing a city that would later birth Herodotus himself. Could his conflicted portrayal of her have been shaped by hometown rivalries or the discomfort of chronicling a woman who outmaneuvered men at their own game? Artemisia's legacy isn't just in battles won or lost, but in the blueprint she left for wielding power on one's own terms. While others saw the sea as a barrier, she treated it as a highway connecting empires, ferrying ideas, and proving that influence could be as fluid as the waves. Her story forces us to ask, how many other women like her have been reduced to footnotes in the sagas of kings? From the salt-sprayed decks of Artemisia's fleet, we turn to the bustling trade routes of another visionary, one who didn't just navigate the currents of commerce, but rewrote the rules of an entire economy. In the halls of China's Han Dynasty, where scholars bent over bamboo scrolls and emperors sought wisdom to govern an empire, one woman's voice rose above the rest, not as a whisper, but as a force that would echo through centuries. Ban Jao wasn't just a historian. She was the architect of a legacy, the hand that completed the monumental Book of Han, a chronicle so vital it became the foundation of China's understanding of its own past. Imagine the weight of that task, finishing a work begun by her father and brother, weaving together centuries of dynasties, wars, and philosophies into a coherent tapestry. But Ban Jao didn't just complete their work, she elevated it, infusing it with insights only a mind as sharp as hers could provide. What set her apart wasn't just her scholarly brilliance, but her unprecedented role as a political advisor to emperors. In a court where women were often confined to the inner quarters, she stood in the corridors of power, her counsel sought on matters of state and governance. Emperors leaned on her understanding of history to navigate the present, proving that wisdom had no gender. Yet Ban Jao's most revolutionary act wasn't in the archives or the throne room. It was in her defiance of Confucian norms that insisted women existed solely to serve men. She penned Lessons for Women, a treatise that dared to argue for female education. A woman must cultivate wisdom as diligently as a man, she wrote, a radical notion in a society that prized female obedience above all. Her words weren't a rejection of tradition but a reimagining of it, urging women to cultivate virtue through knowledge rather than in spite of it. But here's the paradox: Ban Jao's work upheld the very system it subtly challenged. She advocated for women's education not to overthrow Confucian ideals, but to fulfill them more perfectly, a strategic compromise that allowed her ideas to endure where outright rebellion might have been silenced. This duality makes her legacy so fascinating. Was she a reformer cloaked in conservatism, or a traditionalist who accidentally cracked the door open for change? Either way, her influence rippled far beyond her lifetime. For over 1,000 years, Lessons for Women was a foundational text, read by generations of girls who might never have held a brush otherwise. Yet Ban Jao's story isn't just about ink and parchment. It's about the quiet power of reshaping the world from within, of using the tools of the system to alter its very foundations. While warriors like Zenobia and Artemisia carved their names into history with swords and ships, Ban Jao wielded something just as enduring: the written word. And in doing so, she proved that the pen could be mightier than the throne. From the scholarly courts of Han China, we turn to a queen who wielded a different kind of influence, one not of ink, but of divine authority. Where Ban Jao worked within tradition to bend it, another ruler would claim power through the unshakable belief that she was chosen by the gods themselves. Deep in the mist-shrouded forests of Germania, where the Rhine River carved a boundary between empires, a woman's voice carried the weight of the divine. Veladir wasn't just a prophetess of the Bructeri tribe, she was a living oracle, a conduit between mortals and gods, revered so fiercely that no one dared look directly upon her face. When she spoke, entire nations listened. Her prophecies weren't whispered in shadows, they ignited a rebellion that would shake Rome to its core. In an era when Rome dismissed Germanic tribes as barbarians, Veladir wielded a power even legions couldn't conquer: unshakable faith. She foretold the success of the Batavian Rebellion, a revolt led by the warrior Julius Civilis, and her endorsement turned a local uprising into a pan-tribal crusade. Tribes who had warred for generations united under her spiritual authority, believing victory was divinely ordained. The Romans, baffled by a woman who commanded such devotion, spun her as a sorceress, a dangerous aberration in their ordered world. Tacitus, ever the dramatist, painted her as a towering figure dwelling in a remote tower, her decrees delivered through intermediaries like sacred edicts. But to her people, she was no myth. She was the embodiment of their identity, a symbol of resistance against the empire that sought to erase their way of life. The rebellion faltered, as rebellions often do against the machinery of Rome. But Veladir's fate remains one of history's tantalizing mysteries. Captured and paraded as a trophy, she vanished from records. Did she die in obscurity, or did she escape to inspire another day? What's undeniable is the terror she provoked in Rome's heart. They could defeat armies, but how does an empire kill a legend? Veladir's story forces us to reckon with the power of belief as a political force. Where Zenobia and Artemisia commanded armies, Veladir commanded souls, proving that authority could flow not just from swords or treaties, but from the intangible, the whispered word of a woman the gods had touched. And as her voice faded into the forest shadows, another woman was rising in the east, one who understood that true power could also be measured in gold and grain. From the sacred groves of Germania, we journey to the sun-baked ports of a queen who didn't just rule a kingdom. She built an economic dynasty so vast it would make modern moguls gasp. The golden sands of Egypt had seen pharaohs come and go, but none quite like Hatchepsut. While later historians would label her a usurper for daring to rule as a female king, the truth was far more fascinating. She wasn't stealing power, she was reinventing it. Forget the image of a warrior pharaoh leading chariots into battle. Hatshepsut's reign was a masterclass in economic diplomacy, and her legendary expedition to the land of Punt was its crowning achievement. Picture this, a fleet of ships laden with ebony, gold, and incense, sailing back to Thebes not as spoils of conquest, but as tokens of trade. This wasn't just a shopping trip, it was a strategic alliance that secured Egypt's wealth for decades. The murals at Deir el-Bahri immortalized the scene. Punt's queen, her back bent with age, greeting Egyptian envoys with gifts of myrrh trees, their roots carefully packed in baskets for transplanting. Hatshepsut didn't just bring back goods, she brought back industries, cultivating foreign plants to make Egypt self-sufficient in sacred incense used for temple rituals. But Hatshepsut's genius extended beyond commerce. Her building projects weren't mere vanity, they were economic engines. The obelisks at Karnak, the terraced temple of Deir el-Bahri, each stone placed was a job created, a craftsman paid, a community sustained. She transformed construction into a form of statecraft, using architecture to employ thousands and bind the nation's loyalty. So why did Thutmose Roman III later chisel her name from monuments? The erasure wasn't personal, it was political. A woman's unprecedented success threatened the very idea of male divine kingship. By erasing her, Thutmose wasn't just rewriting history, he was restoring what he saw as the natural order. Yet Hatshepsut's shadow lingered. Even defaced, her temple stood, her policies endured, and her trade routes remained open. She proved that a ruler could thrive without endless war, that prosperity could be woven through networks of exchange rather than extracted by the sword. And as her legacy faded from stone, another queen emerged who understood that true power could also be spiritual, not in the rigid hierarchies of Egypt's gods, but in the fiery devotion of a persecuted faith. While Boudicca's fiery rebellion against Rome burned its way into legend, another queen in Britain chose a far colder and far more cunning path. Cartamandua of the Brigantes didn't ride chariots into battle or torch Roman settlements. She didn't need to. Her power lay in something far more dangerous to Rome than rage: strategy. Ruling a vast territory in northern Britain, she watched as Boudicca's revolt ended in slaughter, and she learned the lesson Rome taught all who defied it: resist openly, and you will be crushed. So Cartamandua played a different game. She became Rome's ally, a decision that would brand her a traitor in the eyes of some, but a survivor in the eyes of history. Her most infamous act, the betrayal of Caratacus, the Celtic warlord who fled to her court after years of guerrilla warfare against Rome, Cartamandua didn't hesitate. She handed him over in chains, a gift to Emperor Claudius that cemented her status as Rome's favored client queen. To her critics, this was the ultimate treachery, a surrender of Celtic pride. But Cartamandua wasn't surrendering, she was securing. By aligning with Rome, she shielded her people from the devastation Boudicca's Aisne suffered. Her kingdom remained intact, its trade routes open, its lands unburned. Was this collaboration or calculation? The answer depends on who tells the story. Roman historians praised her loyalty, while Celtic bards spat her name as a warning. Yet even Cartamandua's pragmatism had limits. When her husband Venutius turned against her, and by extension Rome, she called on the empire's legions to crush him, a move that exposed the fragility of her power. Rome could prop her up, but it could also abandon her, and when political winds shifted, they did just that. Her final years vanish into mist. Did she flee into exile? Was she quietly disposed of? The records fall silent, leaving us with a haunting question. Did her alliance buy her people peace, or merely delay the inevitable? Cartamandua's legacy is a Rorschach test for how we judge women in power. Boudica is remembered as a heroine, her defiance romanticized. Cartamandua. A footnote, her name synonymous with compromise, but history isn't a morality play. Sometimes survival isn't about glory, it's about knowing when to bend so you don't break. From the fog-bound highlands of Britain, we turn to a queen who proved that power could be as intoxicating as perfume, and far more enduring. Where Cartamandua navigated politics with cold precision, another ruler understood that influence could blossom in the softest whispers, the most dazzling displays of wealth, and the delicate art of making beauty a weapon. The Amana letters tell a story of diplomacy woven in gold and desperation, pleas for help, marriage alliances, and the delicate dance of empires. Among these clay tablets etched in Babylonian cuneiform, one name whispers from the margins: Tadakippa. A Mitanni princess sent to Egypt as a bride to seal a treaty, she arrived in a land where the sun god Aten was rising to eclipse all others. But was she merely a political pawn, or did she become something far more powerful? A queen who helped shape one of history's most radical religious revolutions. Tadakippa's journey reads like a mystery. Daughter of King Tushratta, she was gifted to Pharaoh Amenhotep III in his twilight years, a living treaty to bind Mitanni and Egypt. But when the old king died, tradition dictated she pass to his heir, the heretic pharaoh Akhenaten. Here, the fragments of her story grow tantalizing. Some scholars argue she re-emerged as Kia, Akhenaten's enigmatic secondary wife, whose name appears mysteriously erased from monuments alongside his. Others go further, suggesting she was Nefertiti, that the famed beauty adopted a new identity after her husband's break with tradition. The evidence is circumstantial but provocative. Kia's foreign origins hinted at in inscriptions, the sudden prominence of sun worship coinciding with Tadakippa's arrival, even the artistic shift toward elongated, androgynous figures in Amana art that some link to Mitanni influences. Why does this matter? Because if Tadakippa survived the transition between reigns, she didn't just witness Akhenaten's upheaval of Egypt's pantheon, she may have catalyzed it. Mitanni's pantheon centered on a sun deity, and Tadakippa would have brought those theological ideas with her. Imagine the conversations in Akhenaten's court, a foreign queen whispering of a single, all-powerful sun god while Egypt's priests clung to Ammon. The timing is too perfect to ignore, yet her legacy, like so many women's, was systematically dismantled. Monuments defaced, records scattered, her name reduced to a footnote in her husband's radical saga. But what if we've been asking the wrong question? The mystery isn't just who Tadakippa became, it's why her story was so carefully fractured. The answer lies in the politics of memory. Akhenaten's successors worked ruthlessly to undo his revolution, chiseling away not just at his heresy, but at the women who enabled it. To acknowledge Tadakippa's influence would have been to admit that change came not from a pharaoh's divine whim, but from the crosscurrents of foreign ideas and the woman who carried them. From the sands of Amana, we turn to a ruler who understood that true power wasn't just in reshaping gods, but in codifying justice. While Tadakippa's voice echoes faintly through erased inscriptions, another queen left laws carved so deeply into stone they would outlast empires. Carthage's marketplace buzzed with the voices of merchants haggling in a dozen languages, but when Ablitter raised her hand, silence fell like a blade. This wasn't just respect, it was the weight of law. In a city where power was measured in silver and ships, Ablitter stood apart as Carthage's only recorded female suffete, a judge whose rulings carved justice into the bedrock of society. While Rome's historians sneered at Carthaginian women for their unnatural influence, Ablitter's existence wasn't just political, it was revolutionary. Fragments of inscriptions hint at her reforms: caps on interest rates to protect debtors, standardized weights to curb merchant fraud, even protections for widows inheriting their husbands' trades. These weren't minor adjustments, they were systemic shifts that rebalanced power in a city built on commerce. Rome's disdain for Carthaginian women like Ablitter reveals more about Roman anxiety than Carthaginian excess. When Cotto the Elder warned that Carthage's women ruled their men, he wasn't just moralizing, he was witnessing a society where women could hold public office, manage vast estates, and yes, even judge disputes between warlords. Ablitter's role during the Punic Wars remains shrouded, but consider this: Carthage's resilience against Rome wasn't just Hannibal's doing. While he crossed the Alps, who arbitrated the disputes back home that kept the treasury flowing, who ensured the grain ships reached the armies, the fragments suggest Ablitter's court became a stabilizing force, a place where wartime contracts were enforced and loot divided fairly, because even pirates need rules when empires clash. But here's the twist: Carthage's egalitarian streak may have been its downfall. Rome's propaganda machine spun Carthage's powerful women as proof of its decadence, a cautionary tale against letting women overreach. By the time Rome salted Carthage's earth, Ablitter's legacy was already being erased, her laws buried under rubble and revisionism. Yet in one of history's quiet ironies, Rome would later adopt similar reforms just without crediting the woman who pioneered them. From the halls of Carthaginian justice, we turn to a queen who understood that power could also flow from compassion, not through the cold calculus of law, but through the healing touch of a ruler who saw medicine as monarchy's highest calling. In the shadow of Egypt's pyramids, where the art of healing was as sacred as the gods themselves, one name stands etched in stone: Merrit Ta, the first female physician in recorded history. Her tomb inscription doesn't merely mention her profession, it proclaims it with pride: Chief Physician, a title that places her at the pinnacle of ancient medicine. Picture her in the halls of the royal court, diagnosing ailments with a precision that rivaled her male counterparts, crafting remedies from honey and willow bark, or perhaps even assisting in surgeries with obsidian blades sharper than modern steel. In a civilization where medicine was intertwined with magic, Merrit Ta would have mastered both, reciting incantations to Sekhmet while setting bones with practiced hands. What's astonishing isn't just her existence, but what it reveals about ancient Egypt's openness to women in science. While later societies would bar women from medical practice for millennia, Egypt's physicians, male and female, were judged by skill, not gender. Papyri like the Ebers and Edwin Smith scrolls detailed treatments for everything from headaches to tumors, and Merrit Ta likely wielded this knowledge with the same authority as Imhotep himself. Did she train apprentices? Did her work influence the famed female healers of the Ptolemaic era, like Cleopatra's personal physician? The gaps in her story are tantalizing, but the legacy is clear. Medicine had no gender in a land where the goddess Isis herself was worshipped as the divine healer. Yet Merrit Ta's story isn't just about breaking barriers, it's about the fragility of historical memory. For centuries, her name was overshadowed by the myth that women in medicine began with figures like Greece's Agnotis, who had to disguise herself as a man to practice. But Merrit Ta predates them all. a silent rebuttal to the assumption that women's contributions to science were anomalies rather than traditions. Her rediscovery in modern times forces us to ask, how many other Merrit Tas have been lost to time, their achievements buried under layers of bias? From the healing halls of Egypt, we turn to a queen who proved that survival could be the ultimate act of strategy. While Merrit Ta mended bodies, another ruler had to outwit conspiracies that threatened her very life. The desert winds howled like vengeful spirits as Samsi of Arabia crouched in the shadows of an Assyrian prison camp, her wrists raw from ropes but her spirit unbroken. This wasn't the end of her story, it was the moment she rewrote it, captured by King Tiglath-Pileser III after leading a rebellion against his empire. Samsi should have vanished into history as another conquered queen. But Assyrian scribes, baffled by her resilience, dubbed her the Desert Fox, a backhanded compliment to her cunning, and for good reason. While other rulers crumbled under Assyria's brutality, Samsi did the unthinkable, she escaped. How? The records are vague, but the implications are thrilling. Did she exploit a guard's negligence, bribe her way free, or simply slip into the night like the shifting sands of her homeland? Whatever her method, she vanished from Assyrian custody and reappeared in Arabia, reclaiming her throne with the same audacity that had lost it. But Samsi wasn't foolish enough to challenge Assyria twice. Instead, she mastered the art of survival through strategy, recognizing that trade, not war, was the path to lasting power. She forged alliances with Levantine cities like Gaza and Tyre, turning her kingdom into a critical hub for frankincense and myrrh. These weren't just commercial deals, they were diplomatic shields. By making herself indispensable to the regional economy, she ensured Assyria needed her alive. The genius of Samsi's reign lies in what she didn't do as much as what she did. She avoided grand rebellions, instead wielding influence through quiet, relentless negotiation. When Assyrian forces marched nearby, she sent tribute just enough to appease, never enough to impoverish. When diplomats demanded her presence in Nineveh, she sent envoys bearing gifts, never stepping into their grasp again. For 20 years, she danced on the edge of empire, never conquered, never truly free, but always in control. And here's the riddle that haunts historians. How did a woman in the most patriarchal of eras, surrounded by empires that saw her as prey, maintain power for 2 decades? The answer might lie in the ruins of her capital, where inscriptions suggest she wasn't just a survivor, she was a builder. Temples, cisterns, and caravanserais rose under her watch, projects that bound her people's loyalty tighter than any oath. Samsi understood what conquerors often forgot. True power isn't just held by the sword, it's cemented by the wells that never run dry and the roads that bring prosperity. As the dust of her cities settles into archaeology, we're left with a portrait of leadership that feels startlingly modern. Samsi's reign whispers a timeless lesson. Sometimes, the greatest victories aren't won on battlefields, but in the quiet spaces between empires where a clever queen could carve out freedom not by defying the lion, but by outthinking it. From the sun-scorched strategies of Arabia, we turn to a ruler who understood that power could rise from the earth itself, not through trade or war, but through the transformative act of building. Where Samsi negotiated with empires, another queen would reshape her kingdom's very landscape, stone by stone. The name Semiramis conjures images of myth, a legendary queen draped in scandal and sorcery, building fantastical gardens that defied gravity. But strip away the Greek embroidery, and you'll find Shamuramat, the flesh and blood ruler whose real achievements eclipse the fantasies. When her husband, King Shamshi-Adad V, died suddenly, Assyria teetered on collapse. Factions vied for power, provinces rebelled, and enemies circled like vultures. Yet Shamiramate didn't just hold the throne for her young son Adad-nirari III. She rebuilt the empire from its foundations. Literally, her reign was a masterclass in infrastructural genius. While later poets would credit Semiramis with Babylon's hanging gardens, the truth is even more remarkable. Shamiramate's engineers pioneered an intricate canal system stretching from the Tigris to arid farmlands, turning wastelands into wheat fields. These weren't just irrigation ditches, they were economic lifelines, ensuring grain surpluses that fed armies and silenced unrest. One inscription near Mosul still bears her name beside a reservoir so vast locals called it the Mother of Waters. But her boldest project, a terraced garden complex at Nineveh, a precursor to the later gardens mythologized by the Greeks. Unlike the purely decorative wonders of legend, Shamiramate's gardens served a dual purpose, dazzling foreign envoys with displays of imperial wealth while testing new agricultural techniques for drought-resistant crops. What cements her legacy isn't just the bricks and mortar, but the words of her own son. Adad-nirari's steles explicitly credit her as co-ruler, a rare admission in a culture where male kings rarely shared glory. By the command of my mother Shamiramate, he declares on one monument, "I rebuilt the temples of Ashur." Another tablet describes her presiding over treaty negotiations with the Medes, an unthinkable role for most women in the patriarchal Assyrian court. Why does this matter? Because it proves her authority wasn't whispered in shadows, it was chiseled into stone for eternity. Yet the greatest testament to her influence lies in linguistics. When Greek historians like Diodorus Siculus later distorted her into the seductress Semiramis, they inadvertently preserved a kernel of truth, her name. Shamiramate evolved into Semiramis through centuries of retelling, a phonetic breadcrumb leading back to the real woman behind the myth. Even in distortion, she couldn't be erased. From the dust of Nineveh, we turn to a queen who wielded not chisels or canals, but words, crafting a linguistic legacy that would outlast empires. Where Shamiramate built with stone, another ruler would construct something far more enduring, the first written language of her people. The clay tablets cracked under the weight of history, but the words etched into them still hummed with the voice of a queen who spoke the language of empires. Tadakippa of Hatti didn't just rule alongside her husband Hattusili III. She rewrote the rules of Bronze Age diplomacy. Fluent in Hittite, Akkadian, and the nuanced dialects of power, she became the linchpin of an alliance that would defy centuries of warfare. Picture her in the torchlit chambers of Hattusa, dictating letters to Pharaoh Ramses II, each syllable carefully chosen to balance flattery with steel. "My brother, the son of Egypt," she wrote, weaving familial warmth into statecraft. "Let our lands be as two lions sharing one prey." This wasn't mere correspondence, it was a masterclass in psychological warfare wrapped in honeyed prose. Her crowning achievement, the Treaty of Kadesh, often credited solely to Ramses and Hattusili. But dig deeper. The treaty's most revolutionary clauses, extradition protocols for refugees, mutual defense pacts that respected sovereignty, bear the fingerprints of Tadakippa's pragmatism. When Ramses proposed a marriage alliance to seal the peace, she didn't just consent. She negotiated the bride's dowry down to the last silver ingot, ensuring Egypt's gift of grain shipments would feed Hatti's drought-stricken cities. Even more startling, she corresponded directly with Ramses' queen, Nefertari, creating a backchannel that bypassed traditional male intermediaries. "To my sister, the great royal wife," one letter begins before pivoting to discuss troop movements near Damascus, proof that Tadakippa understood diplomacy wasn't confined to throne rooms. Yet her brilliance extended beyond treaties. As high priestess of the storm god, she reformed Hittite religious practices with a subtlety that would make modern politicians envious. Merging Hurrian and Hittite deities into a unified pantheon, she didn't erase local gods, she rebranded them. The Hurrian goddess Hepat became synonymous with Hatti's son goddess Araniti, a theological sleight of hand that eased tensions in conquered territories. Temple inventories from her reign show something remarkable: equal distributions of offerings to male and female deities, a quiet nod to balance in both heaven and earth. But how did a woman wield such influence in the cutthroat world of Bronze Age geopolitics? The answer lies in her letters to Assyria's king, Tukulti-Ninurta. When he dismissed her as the woman who meddles in men's affairs, she fired back with a blade-sharp retort: "Does the lioness not hunt when the lion sleeps?" Her power wasn't borrowed, it was forged in the crises that nearly destroyed Hatti. During her husband's illness, she single-handedly suppressed a coup by releasing damning tablets exposing rivals' corruption, an ancient precursor to whistleblowing. Pujuhepa's legacy crumbles into fragments after her death, but one tablet survives with eerie prescience. In it, she warns her descendants: "A kingdom is not held by force alone, but by the tongues of those who speak for it." Centuries later, as Hatti collapsed under mysterious circumstances, her words would ring tragically prophetic. From the scriptoria of Hattusa, where diplomacy was etched in clay, we turn to a queen who knew that true power could also ride the waves, not through letters, but through the daring redesign of an entire navy. Where Pujuhepa mastered the art of the written word, another ruler would prove that innovation could be as formidable as any treaty. The pharaoh's lighthouse didn't just pierce the Alexandrian sky, it was a beacon of Berenice II's ambition, a monument to a queen who understood that greatness could be measured in more than gold or conquest. While history remembers her husband Ptolemy III as the ruler who expanded Egypt's borders, Berenice's true legacy wasn't carved in territory, but in the pursuit of knowledge. She didn't just fund the lighthouse, one of the seven wonders. She turned Alexandria's court into a sanctuary for thinkers, where the brilliant Eratosthenes first calculated the Earth's circumference. Imagine the scene: a queen leaning over his crude maps, nodding as he explained how shadows in Syene and Alexandria proved the planet's curvature. This wasn't idle patronage, it was a deliberate choice to elevate Egypt as the intellectual capital of the Mediterranean. Yet for all her devotion to progress, Berenice's life ended in shadows darker than any Eratosthenes measured. Ancient whispers claim her own son ordered her murder, serving her a poisoned cup after she dared oppose his reckless policies. Whether fact or slander, the rumor reveals how quickly a woman's influence could be recast as interference when it challenged male power. Compare her fate to Cleopatra's, another queen of Egypt who embraced learning but whose story was reduced to seduction and suicide. Berenice's name barely lingers in popular memory, yet her fingerprints are everywhere on the lighthouse's foundations, in the geometry texts of the Great Library, even in the stars themselves. The constellation, Berenice's hair, was named for the locks she supposedly sacrificed for her husband's safe return from war, a celestial tribute to devotion. But perhaps it's better read as a metaphor for how her achievements were scattered across history, glittering fragments waiting to be pieced together. And just as the lighthouse's beam shifted from land to sea, our story now turns to a ruler who bridged those worlds not with stone and flame, but with verses and valor. Where Berenice wielded patronage as power, another queen would prove that the pen could be as mighty as the sword, and the sword as precise as a poet's quill. The sagas sing of Lagertha, the legendary shield maiden, but history whispers another name, Visna, a Slavic warrior queen whose deeds were anything but myth. While Viking lore romanticizes women in battle, Visna's story comes to us not from poetry, but from the ink of Frankish chroniclers who witnessed her defiance firsthand. Picture the year 805 when Charlemagne's armies marched eastward, expecting an easy conquest of the Slavic tribes. What they found instead was Visna standing atop the wooden palisades of her fortress, rallying her people with a sword in one hand and a banner in the other. The chronicler Einhard, no friend to the Slavs, grudgingly recorded her as the Shield Maiden's Terror, a title earned not through legend, but through the sheer audacity of her resistance. Visna's fortress was no mere stronghold, it was a statement. Built at the confluence of two rivers, its walls bristled with archers she'd trained herself, many of them women who traded distaffs for daggers. When the Franks demanded surrender, she answered with fire, hurling burning pitch onto their siege engines. For 3 weeks, she outmaneuvered one of Europe's most formidable armies, using the marshy terrain to funnel them into ambushes. Even after her eventual capture, the chronicles hint at her unbroken spirit. Some accounts claim she was paraded through Aachen in chains, her gaze so fierce it silenced the crowds. Others suggest she vanished into the forests, escaping to fight another day. What makes Visna extraordinary isn't just her bravery, but the way she upends our assumptions. Shield maidens weren't confined to Norse sagas, they were a reality across medieval Europe. Their stories erased not because they didn't exist, but because they didn't fit the narratives of the monks who wrote history. Visna's defiance echoes in the artifacts left behind. Slavic arrowheads lodged in Frankish armor, carvings of armed women on temple walls, even the stubborn survival of her people's traditions despite imperial conquest. And just as Visna's story bridges myth and reality, another ruler's legacy shimmers between the spiritual and the material. From the smoke of battle, we turn to a queen who understood that power could be minted as well as wielded, where blades and banners gave way to the quiet authority of coins. The coins clinked together in the palm of Cynaine of Macedon's hand, each one stamped with her own likeness, a bold declaration that this was no ordinary princess. Half-sister to Alexander the Great, she didn't just inherit his ambition, she forged her own legacy, quite literally, in silver and gold. While Alexander marched east, Cynaine turned her attention west, leading military campaigns in Illyria with a skill that left even seasoned generals in awe. Picture her on the battlefield, armor gleaming, rallying troops not with her brother's name but with her own authority. She didn't just command armies, she funded them, minting currency that bore her image, a rare act for any woman in the ancient world, let alone one operating in the shadow of history's most famous conqueror. But Cynaine's story takes a darker turn. Her ambition threatened the fragile power structures of Macedon after Alexander's death. When she arranged her daughter Eurydice's marriage to the new king, Philip Hideous, it was a move to secure influence. Instead, it sealed her fate. The regent Perdiccas, fearing her growing power, ordered her assassination. The brutality of her murder was matched only by the thoroughness of its cover-up. Official histories glossed over her achievements, reducing her to a footnote in Alexander's saga. Even her coins were melted down, recast with the faces of men who sought to erase her. Why such lengths to suppress her legacy? The answer lies in what Cynaine represented: a woman who refused to be sidelined, who led armies and minted money as effortlessly as any king. Her very existence challenged the myth that Macedon's glory was solely a male achievement. The irony is palpable. While Alexander's legend grew to godlike proportions, his half-sister's name was scrubbed from records, her victories attributed to others. Yet fragments remain. Polyaenus, the ancient strategist, recounts how she personally slew an Illyrian queen in single combat, a feat that cemented her reputation as a warrior. Archaeology whispers to a handful of surviving coins, their edges worn but her profile still defiantly visible. From the blood-stained sands of Macedon, we turn to a ruler who wielded not swords or coins but ideas. Where Cynae mastered the arts of war and economics, another queen would prove that philosophy could be just as revolutionary and just as dangerous. History remembers Cleopatra as the queen who charmed Rome, but another Cleopatra, equally brilliant, far more enigmatic, left her mark not in politics but in the shimmering realm of alchemy. Known as Cleopatra the Alchemist, this shadowy figure from Alexandria's intellectual golden age didn't rule nations. She sought to master nature itself. While her namesake dazzled with pearls dissolved in vinegar, this Cleopatra wielded a different kind of power, the secrets of chrysopoeia, the art of transmuting base metals into gold. Her writings, preserved in fragments, reveal a mind as methodical as any philosopher's. Join the male and the female she instructed, and you will find what you seek. These weren't cryptic riddles but precise chemical formulas, veiled in metaphor to protect their potency from the uninitiated. The Leiden Papyrus, a 4th century alchemical text, whispers her legacy. Among its stained pages are recipes attributed to Cleopatra not for potions, but for practical metallurgy. One describes a method of alloying copper to mimic gold's luster, a technique so advanced some scholars argue it predates later medieval alchemy by centuries. Was she a fraudster peddling illusions? Far from it. Her work bridged the mystical and the empirical, a fusion of Egyptian temple secrets and Greek rationalism. The tools she described, the kerotakis for sublimation, the tribicos for distillation, weren't just symbols. They were prototypes for the lab equipment still used today. But who was she? The mystery deepens in the margins. Some historians speculate she was Jewish, her knowledge rooted in Alexandria's vibrant diaspora. Others trace her to Greek scholarly circles, noting her references to Plato's Elements. A few daring theories even suggest she wasn't one woman, but a collective identity adopted by generations of female alchemists working in secrecy. What's undeniable is her influence. Later giants like Zosimos of Panopolis cited her as a foundational figure, the mother of the art. Cleopatra the alchemist's true genius lay in her duality. She revered tradition yet innovated relentlessly. She wrote of divine forces but demanded reproducible results. In an age when women were barred from academies, she turned her workshop into a laboratory and her scrolls into a legacy. While empires rose and fell, her pursuit of transformation, of metal, of knowledge, of possibility endured. And just as alchemy blurred the lines between science and myth, another queen mastered the art of ambiguity, not in a laboratory but in the shadowy world of espionage. Where Cleopatra sought to transmute lead into gold, this ruler spun secrets into power. The smoky corridors of Rome's imperial palace hid more than marble and gold. They concealed Triaria, a woman who mastered the art of seeing without being seen. While history paints her as Emperor Vitellius's meddling wife, Tacitus's sneering descriptions reveal something far more intriguing. A strategic mind operating Rome's first documented female-led intelligence network. When Tacitus grumbles that she hovered near the emperor's councils like a bad omen, his discomfort speaks volumes. What was this woman doing in spaces where elite Roman women were meant to be silent ornaments? The answer lies in the unspoken power of whispered secrets. Triaria didn't just listen, she curated information with ruthless precision. During the year of the 4 emperors, when Rome teetered on civil war, she intercepted letters, planted informants among slaves, and even, according to one fragmentary account, posed as a servant to eavesdrop on enemy generals. Tacitus dismisses these acts as womanly intrusions, but let's re-examine them through a modern lens. When Vitellius's rival Otho planned a surprise attack, it was Triaria who uncovered the plot, allowing Vitellius's forces to counterambush. Was this meddling or military genius? Her methods mirrored those of Rome's famed frumentarii, the imperial couriers who doubled as spies, except she operated without official title or acknowledgement. The real scandal wasn't her actions, but her refusal to play the expected role. While Roman wives like Livia wielded influence through maternal virtue, Triaria embraced the shadows. She understood that in a crumbling republic, power flowed through networks, not just bloodlines. When Vitellius fell, her fate vanished from records, but consider the timing. The Flavian dynasty that followed systematically purged Vitellius's allies, yet no execution order for Triaria survives. Did she vanish into the underworld she knew so well? Or did the new regime, recognizing her skills, quietly repurpose them? Her legacy lingers in the contradictions of Roman historiography. Male spies like Sejanus were vilified but remembered. Triaria was reduced to a caricature of feminine interference. Yet the very tactics Tacitus scorned, manipulating social invisibility, exploiting gendered assumptions, would later define Byzantine imperial intelligence. Perhaps the question isn't whether she was Rome's first female spymaster, but why we hesitate to call her one. From the whispered conspiracies of Rome, we turn to our final figure, a queen who defies categorization, her story hovering between history and myth. Where Triaria mastered the art of deception, this ruler's power lay in something far more elusive, the ability to become legend while still breathing. The name Dido conjures images of a lovelorn queen throwing herself onto a pyre for Aeneas, but strip away Virgil's poetic license, and you'll find Elissa of Tyre, a Phoenician royal who didn't just flee her homeland. She engineered one of antiquity's most audacious escapes. When her brother Pygmalion murdered her husband, a priest of Melkart, Elissa didn't mourn. She mobilized. Under cover of night, she loaded ships with Tyre's most valuable cargo, not gold or silks, but its artisans, scholars, and navigators. This wasn't just an evacuation, it was a calculated transfer of intellectual capital. The ancient historian Justin recounts how she even tricked Pygmalion by filling sacks with sand, claiming they held her husband's wealth, buying time for her convoy to sail beyond pursuit. Her arrival on North Africa's shores is where myth and history collide. The famous tale of the oxhide cut into strips to claim land wasn't just a clever trick. Archaeological evidence suggests it mirrored actual Phoenician trade contracts, where symbolic gestures sealed complex deals. Elissa didn't swindle locals. She negotiated with Berber chieftains using a shared mercantile language. The hide represented a down payment, with Carthage's later tribute payments fulfilling the bargain. This was state building as a joint venture, not conquest. But what of her fiery end? Virgil's suicide twists an older, darker truth. Phoenician fragments describe a ritual where Elissa entered a sacred fire to wed Carthage's patron god, ensuring the city's prosperity. Some scholars argue this was a metaphorical coronation, a queen symbolically reborn as the embodiment of her realm. Others see a grimmer political reality, a ruler cornered by rivals, choosing self-sacrifice over surrender. The ambiguity itself is telling. Elissa's story wasn't erased, it was overwritten, first by Roman poets needing a tragic foil for Aeneas, then by historians who couldn't fathom a woman founding an empire without a man's shadow looming behind her. Yet Carthage's very existence whispers her triumph. While Rome vilified her as Dido, her people called her Elissat, the woman who walked through fire. And in the ashes of her legend, we're left with a question. When a queen's death is remembered but her life's work is distorted, which is the greater betrayal? 20 women, 20 revolutions, each one a crack in antiquity's glass ceiling. Each story a testament to what happens when brilliance refuses to be buried. From Amanirenas defying Rome to Hypatia illuminating Alexandria's halls, from Zenobia's empire building to Ban Jao's ink-stained reforms, these leaders didn't just navigate a man's world, they rewrote its rules. Look closer and you'll spot the patterns: trade routes forged by Hatchepsut's ships, treaties shaped by Pujuhepa's words, the quiet power of Merrit Ta's healing hands. Education, diplomacy, economics, these weren't just their tools, they were weapons against erasure. Yet here's the unsettling truth: their obscurity isn't accidental. History isn't just written by the victors, it's filtered through the biases of those who held the pens. Why do we know Caesar's name but not Cynane's? Why are Cleopatra's affairs legendary while Cleopatra the alchemist's experiments fade into footnotes? The answer lies in what we've been taught to value. Conquest over commerce, battles over books, men's voices over women's visions. But you hold the antidote. Share one name from this video: Ablitter's justice, Samsi's escape, Triaria's spycraft, and you become part of the correction. Every retelling chips away at centuries of omission. That African proverb lingers for a reason. Until lions have their historians, tales of the hunt will glorify the hunter. These women were the lions. Now it's our turn to pick up the pen.